why is it that semen retention will never be mainstream? This is interesting, let's talk about it. So in order for a thing to be mainstream, a thing has to appeal to the minds of millions of people. That means a thing, by its nature, cannot be too advanced, cannot be too high consciousness, and basically cannot contain too much truth. Because the more truth that something contains, the less likely that thing will be understood by large numbers of people. And the more truth that something has, the more likely it will shatter paradigms and social conditioning. And the truth is, a lot of the time people need these things, because otherwise they're going to be able to think way too freely. And that's not too good for society and maintaining the illusion. So instead we could ask, well then what kind of things do go mainstream? What kind of things do appeal to millions of people? Well, that would be things that target and stimulate the ego. So just for a second, take a look around. Take a look at anything at all, anything that has gone mainstream, and just notice that it does not contain that much truth. Instead, what it contains are things that are deeply tied to our lower human survival. Things like sex, ego, fear, and judgment. Right? These kind of things, they stimulate the human mind. They rile people up and they push the right kind of buttons so that people care and give a crap. These kind of things, they will always be mainstream. And that's because they are rooted in your survival, in the deeply primitive parts of you which have no choice but to care and to pay attention. Therefore, I want you to be open to how nothing of any higher truth will ever be mainstream, so long as the average human consciousness is low and still tied down by survival. So now that we understand this, let's actually take a look at retention. What kind of thing is retention? Where does it place itself here? Well, retention is actually a very high consciousness thing. It's something that requires you to turn down immediate sexual pleasure in order to receive more energy and more life force. I might describe it as a kind of high consciousness trade-off where you surrender orgasm and ejaculation, your lower human pleasures, for deeper and more spiritual energy, also known as ojas. Now this, as you can imagine, knowing now what you now know, will not go mainstream, and actually cannot go mainstream. And that's because us human beings are not sexually mature enough. We still have a lot more growth and evolution to do before we can expect people to choose a high consciousness thing over a survival thing. Because the deep truth here is that humanity is still far too sex obsessed to be interested in a practice where you renounce sex, or at least orgasm, in exchange for deeper spiritual rewards. And well, rightly so. Because after all, human beings are human. And we all have a core need for sex. And it's not just a want, it's a need. And that's because it's for your survival. The need for sex is actually hardwired into you because it serves your survival and has done for thousands of years. Therefore, expecting people to change or expecting an entire culture to shift on something like this is actually pretty unrealistic. Also because collectively, we grow very, very slowly as a species. Really, we're still in the kind of dark ages when it comes to the development and the maturity of our psyches, as well as the baseline level of the consciousness of our society. These things are really not as developed as they're made out to be, or maybe as they seem. We're still really materialistic, and what's funny is retention. It kind of wakes you up to see this. I find that a lot of the time, you can kind of see right through certain things. So for example, have you ever seen a flash of pornography when you're really not aroused? And you really clearly see that it's very deeply fake and of a low consciousness. And in the same way, if you take one look at something like social media, your inner wisdom will tell you that what that is sex and ego. There's not really any wisdom there. And instead, there's a bunch of survival there. So retaining and observing the world, that's a powerful move. That's really what you want to do in order to see the truth of where most of us are. But anyway, what's nice to know is that this kind of development, it's mostly present on a kind of collective level. Whereas on an individual level, which is what you've got direct experience of right now, you can realize that there is nothing stopping you from individually growing like an absolute madman, right? It can be a big motivator for you to be basically well ahead of the game and well ahead of the quite materialistic world around you by retaining and by becoming more of a wise individual. And the way that you do that is not just by controlling and transmuting your energy, but also by self-actualizing and by spiritually awakening. Doing these two things means that your value as a human being skyrockets, right? Because you're thinking for yourself. You're realizing the truth about yourself and the truth about the world and reality. You become a very powerful individual with a very powerful mind when you start turning inward and doing this kind of work on yourself, rather than turning outward and falling prey to the distractions and the temptations of mainstream society. So essentially, my message with this video is don't expect people around you to understand or practice retention. It's not mainstream and it won't be for the foreseeable future. What you can do instead though is retain yourself and raise consciousness in your own life. Work on becoming an embodiment of what is possible with this work and this spiritual work, right? And then once you've done that, lead the way for others. That's powerful. So that is it for me. If you were surprised by this, or maybe you knew this intuitively, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, keep going, my friends. Keep meditating, keep retaining and avoiding PMO, and doing everything you can to improve and awaken yourself. And as always, if you would like more videos, then my friend, please do subscribe.